Today I'm going to just talk, and it's going to be in the form of a story. This is a true story. For those who don't know, I am a veteran, but now I'm civil service for the United States Army, and my job is one that I work very closely with the soldiers deployed to Iraq in 2007. So, like I said, that's where this story begins. I deployed from Fort Bliss, Texas, to Iraq. One of the first places you have to land before you actually go into Iraq is the country of Kuwait, and there you do some minor administrative in processing or whatever you want to call it. They get your paperwork together. You get if you are supposed to have any type of issue or something like that. And what I mean by issue is they give you certain gear that you might need for the country that you're going to. In this case, it was Iraq. If you're going at that time, if you were going into Iraq, one of the things you had to have was IBA, which is body armor, and the helmet, Kevlar. Um, we were issued that. Even though you were civilians, you still get what's known as TA-50. If you're a soldier, you know what that is. But TA-50 is all the gear that a soldier gets that he needs to get the mission done. Um, but in our case, it was very minimal stuff. It was a couple of pieces of uniform, IBA and Kevlar. So when we got all that straightened out and figured out what plane we were supposed to be on, and we flew into a place called Balad. Uh, it was a joint Air Force Army um, installation, mainly Air Force because of the airfield, but some Army were there too because of they used it for basically for storage, like fuel storage, food, water, medical, and of course ammunition, which is why that's kind of became our base of operations. We were responsible for all of Iraq, but Balad is it was where most of our work took place. But anyway, when I say this is where this story begins, I want to talk about something that happened to me, and it wound up being well, looking back on it now, it's kind of funny, but at the time I didn't think it was funny at all. But here's what happened. As everybody knows, 2007 was not a fun time to be in Iraq. Something was happening there called the Surge, which the Surge was a strategy that one of the four-star generals over there came up with. Part of that was he was going to basically get the Sunni Arab Iraqis to fight with the United States against the insurgents. Um, because because of this, there was a massive influx, I should say, not influence, influx of troops into the country, which was why I got the nickname the Surge. There was an increase of the amount of troops being sent to Iraq. So when a situation like that happens, at least from my how it affects my career field is that meant there was going to be more ammunition in the country. So now that means we have more ammunition to monitor and more area of responsibility and whatnot. But what that how that ties into the story was that meant more troops equals more enemy activity. So Balad, or Anaconda, which is the Army's terminology for the location, had the reputation of being attacked quite frequently. And what I mean by attacked was they would get rocket and mortar attacks pretty frequently. So it acquired the nickname Mortaritaville, which is a play on the song Margaritaville by Jimmy Buffett. And the reason why they call it Mortaritaville because it would get very frequent mortar and rocket attacks. But anyway, that's the crux of the story. So, this is where I'll start it. One day, me and my boss, we had to go take care of some administrative business. So we jumped into our truck, and on Balad, the roads, I want to say probably 80% of the road follows the perimeter of the fence, which Balad was probably about 3 miles maybe long and maybe 2 miles wide, something like that. It was almost the shape of a square, but had one of the corners cut off. So the side of the installation we were on was opposite from that corner that had the side cut off. But you still had to follow the fence basically to get to the ASP. So that means you're right on the perimeter. Well, while we were driving to get to the perimeter road, there was a stop sign. It was one of the last stop signs you got to before you got to the perimeter road. And on this particular day, right as we were pulling up to the stop sign, we started receiving indirect fire, which is a mortar barrage. Now, mortars, typically the way mortars, like the tactic with using mortars is you usually get two rounds impacting initially. And the reason for that is they want to do what's called bracket fire, which means the two rounds that are fired, one lands the furthest away from you, and then there's another round that lands a little ways up from the initial impact. And then they try to fill in the gap. So then that's where all the main mortar barrage lands, is in between those two, the first two impacts. And they do that by what's called walking the rounds, which means they start kind of coming in a pattern. Of course, it's not a perfect pattern, but it's, relatively speaking, it's in a pattern. And in this case, we were not in the bracket. I guess we were kind of off to the side of it, but the rounds started impacting relatively close. I would say maybe 50 meters, something along those lines. Close enough that you probably would not. Well, I know because I didn't see any, I didn't see any shrapnel or anything like that kicking up dust, but you can tell how close a mortar is, obviously from the sound, and from you can feel a little bit of the shock wave in your chest. But my boss and I were in the vehicle when this was taking place. He must have panicked a little bit because I honestly, I've never seen anyone do this before, but as we were approaching the stop sign and this was taking place, he actually jumped out of the truck and started running. And being that he was the driver, that left me on the passenger side wondering what the fuck is going on. Sorry for my language, but to say that I was double whammied is an understatement, because here is this guy jumping out of a truck running for whatever cover he could find. I don't know exactly where he thought he was going to go, but that left the truck still moving, because he literally just unasked the truck without, putting it in park or anything. The truck was still running down the road. So here I was, I had to lean over to the driver's side and not only steer the truck, but I must have like pulled the emergency brake or something, because the truck stopped, but it wasn't much longer after he jumped out and started running that the mortar barrage was pretty much over. I mean, because when these things happen, they last maybe 2 minutes at the most, depending on who was getting froggy enough to do it that day. It was probably coming from the village there, because there was a village right beside. It was actually the village of Balad. But there were other small little outlying villages around those villages, so it could have came from there. It could have came from anywhere, really. They were, how can I put it, kind of like, it wouldn't be like standard infantry style indirect fire. It's more like hit and run tactics, like guerrilla tactics. So they would probably set up their mortar real fast, just drop a couple of mortars in the tube, and then hightail it out of there, which meant, being that they really never wore uniforms or anything of that nature, they could just blend right back into the population without anybody other than the villagers knowing who they were, So, but anyway, that was one of the weirdest things that's ever happened to me. For the rest of the time I was in Iraq, because at this time, we did civilians do a 6-month tour whenever we deploy. That's just the way it's set up, probably because of Congress or whatever. But this was relatively early in our deployment. I want to say we left before Bliss in March, and I want to say that this was probably around April, or maybe possibly early May, but I think it was in April. So we probably hadn't been there more than 70 days when this took place. But for the rest of the deployment, I kind of had a sideways eye for that guy, because to this day I still can't believe this guy did that. And it was just a really weird occurrence. And I guess in some ways I can't blame him for doing that, but hey, I guess it wound up being a story I could tell my grandkids one day. But anyway, I just thought I would share a story of something that happened to me in my career, which is coming to an end.